All right, folks, it is my great pleasure to welcome back Andy Schectman, CEO of Miles Franklin. And folks, what a perfect time to get this gentleman back on. Andy, thank you so much for joining me right now.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Zach. I've been looking forward to getting back, and it was great to meet you in person a few weeks ago back in Vancouver. But man, I'll tell you, there's so much stuff going on right now. It's been a blur, but I think it's a great opportunity to sit down and chat here, and I'm appreciative for the opportunity.
Sure has been moving quickly, hasn't it? And it was an absolute pleasure to meet you in Vancouver, some other big hitters in the room there as well with you. And I really thought that Jay Martin really set the tone with his first opening speech where he's talking about building a moat before we build a castle. So we're going to kind of get into the opportunity later on after we go through the current events, the crisis that we have at hand here. But that really set the tone for that conference. You really blew it away there when you took the stage. Like I said, there were some other big hitters, but the main takeaway for me was the reason why we pick up some silver, some gold, some precious metals, some more conservative plays here in the commodities is so that I can go take the risk. You know that I'm a crypto guy. I got just a couple cryptos. I don't like all of them. I think 99% go away, but there's a couple with utility that got me kind of interested. But for me, the reason why I can do that, right, is because I've taken a conservative position with some physical silver on hand as well, right? And so we're gonna get into that, but I really thought it was a fantastic conference. Jay set the tone with that opening speech, and then you lit it up to what was the title again of the session that you had there, Andy? That was a really good one.
You stumped me on that. I think because I've changed it a few times. I think it was, well, let me tell you.
Like
Geez,
a
I think,
change. It was like a changing new world. I'm sorry. I was gonna look it up
you know
beforehand
what?
because
I
I thought that
should
it.
have that. Just as I feel embarrassed that I don't even know. I think it was, we may have to back this up and reverse this. Hang on. Let me see. I apologize. It was called, so sorry, man.
It's my bad. I was gonna look it up beforehand. I apologize, Andy.
Let me find the exact name of it. Suppose I should really know. Um,
I will tell you this, folks. There wasn't enough room. There was standing room only, and it was pouring out into the conference building to listen to Andy speak.
Here we go.
And he took it away once again. Great
It was
speech, Andy.
called The Great Financial Reset, I believe. Let me just double check. Yeah, The Great Reset, how it happened. So should have known that.
The Great
I
Reset, how it happens. Yep.
Yeah, my brain is feels like a Nerf ball with how hard we've been working over the past few weeks. I guess I should have known that. But yes, it's the Great Reset, the Great Financial Reset, and how it happens. And I think that it's becoming more and more evident to me that that reset is already underway.
Right. So we're going to get right on into that. Right now, we just saw the Fed has chosen to raise interest rates another 25 basis points. So they bring more pain. But on the back end here, they are erasing nearly 2/3 of the quantitative tightening that happened since last year. Right. And they've basically told the big banks that you got a 100% backstop. Now, we're not allowed to call it a bailout, Andy. Make sure we don't call it that. That's politically incorrect, right? We call it a backstop now. And all these different swap lines, all these different new funds, facilities, and programs to inject liquidity into the system, essentially bailing out and providing a backstop for all of the big banks. What has been your main takeaway from the Fed's actions here, and how soon do you think a Fed pivot is coming?
Well, first and foremost, when you take a look at what's happened with the banks, I mean, what Janet Yellen did, as far as I'm concerned, is treasonous in the respect that they bailed out Signature Bank and Silicon Valley Bank, and they bailed them out. Everyone thought that that was now the new mantra, that these banks will all be bailed out, and they did so and said that the taxpayer won't be on the hook for it. Now we know what that means. That means that they'll just create money and we'll all be on the hook for it through the loss of purchasing power. in our currency. And that was what everyone believed for a little bit anyway, until the representative from Oklahoma who was grilling Janet Yellen in front of a House committee, subcommittee inquiry, and says, well, listen, Madam Secretary, you have bailed out these banks, and we understand that this is what's happening now. So let me get this straight. If one of my constituents has $5 million in any regional bank in the state of Oklahoma, is it true that they will be made whole? And she says, no. She says it will take a majority, an uber majority, as how she phrased it, from the FOMC, the FDIC, the president, and herself, to decide if these banks are systemic enough to bail them out. Now, I mean, you have to realize that these small regional banks, there's 5,000 of them approximately across the United States. They represent 70% of all of the loans to the small businesses in this country, Zach. And small businesses in this country traditionally amount to at least 40% of GDP. These are banks that have given small businesses loans based upon relationships and in some cases, generational, where mom and dad started a business, and now brother and sister start a business, and this has been going on. You've been working with the same small bank for years, or a farmer has $5 million worth of operational money, or a small trucking company. This is no small deal. And what she just said was, no, we're judge, jury, and executioner. We'll decide who lives and who dies based upon the fact, are they too big to fail or not? In essence, this has created a massive run on the banks. And because these banks, with interest rates at zero for the past decade, or near zero, these banks would give you 0.25% in a savings account, and then they would throw their money into what was considered safe and conservative U.S. Treasuries at 2%, or mortgage-backed securities at 4%. And that would have been considered safe. The problem is they have long maturities. And the other problem is that during COVID, the banks had the ability, thanks to the president, to remove all reserve requirements. So when you deposit $100,000 in the bank, it's not there. They'll take that, and they'll take 99,000 of it and send it and buy treasuries at 2%. Well, a 10-year treasury at 2% is very conservative, right? Until you need to sell it prior to maturity in a rising interest rate environment. That's the problem. Interest rates have gone up to 5% on the 10-year treasury and 7 or 8% on the mortgage-backed securities. And what do you have? You have an environment where these banks have nothing in the way of reserves. There's a reason or an impetus to withdraw money. Look at Credit Suisse as an example, where $1 billion was pulled out in the fourth quarter. Whatever the reason is to pull money out of the banks, when they get redemption requests, they don't have the reserves to meet them. So what do they have to do? They have to sell what is considered a safe asset is now toxic. And that is a security, a bond or a mortgage-backed security that's lost 50 or 60%. And the banks have not been made to value those assets on their balance sheet at market value. They're valued at par, which means what you paid for them. And when they have to be marked to market, when they have to be sold prematurely in order to come up with the cash to redeem for depositors, they're losing 50, 60%. And in the case of Silicon Bank, in 24 hours, they went insolvent. So all of the banks who weren't risking and were doing things that were always considered conservative have been betrayed by this massive rapid escalation in interest rates. And this has caught the banks off guard. And the fragility and the systemic nature of the banks, the way they're all tied together through derivatives, has created a massive problem. Now, when she comes out and says, we're only going to backstop the systemically too big to fail banks, what she has basically done is put a gun to the head of the small banks, lit a fuse with dynamite under every one of them. We've done over $100 million in sales in the past 14 days. We did 800 million. And it was a record year last year. The point of it is that so many people are freaked out. They're either rushing to buy crypto, rushing to buy gold, or rushing to pull their money out and put them into the big banks like Wells Fargo and Bank of America and whatnot. And this is creating a massive problem. And the story is not over. It's going to get really bad before it gets better. And when you talk about quantitative tightening, 11 months worth of quantitative tightening, 2/3 of it, as you mentioned, have been erased in 2 weeks. So we have signaled to the world that we are moving into a period of inflation, a continued inflation, and we will do what all governments have done since the beginning of time, and that is choose inflation over austerity, because there is no way they can backstop all of these banks. There's $120 billion in FDIC backing over $9 trillion in deposits. It doesn't work. And so when you talk about backstopping these massive, too big to fail banks, where does the money come from? You print it. You print it out of nowhere, which creates massive inflation. And you saw what happened by printing $8 trillion over the last few years to inflation. What happens if you try to backstop globally these $19 trillion worth of deposits when you're talking all the banks? And you know what's even crazier than that is people aren't even talking about something that happened recently, and that was the $20 billion lifeline to the Swiss Bank Corporation, the second biggest bank in the world in Switzerland, that laid off 9,000 people and this close to going bankrupt. Quietly, they gave them $20 billion. This is a systemic problem. And, you know, this is a problem that I think is certainly in its infantile stages. I think you will see a myriad of bank failures and bank closures as more and more people pull their money out of banks, who are then forced to sell their treasuries and their mortgage-backed securities at huge losses, and one after the other, they will all fall. What Janet Yellen did is just beyond horrible.
And that right there, folks, is when you get a gentleman like Andy here, you just let him take the stage and break it down for you guys. You guys just got the full breakdown of the situation that we're currently in. And like Andy said, like I've been saying, we got a lot more pain on the way, because if the Fed just leaves the situation as is with the rates, we've already killed off the real estate market. We've already brought in a lot of pain to Main Street. But then now, if we see them continue to erase quantitative tightening, continue to print, continue to do new forms of swaps, swap lines, liquidity injections, new funds, facilities, like you said, it took tens of billions of dollars to bail out Credit Suisse. And then if I'm not mistaken, they actually had to, I heard $100 billion backstop, like insurance policy, like guarantee if it goes sideways, we got $100 billion backstop, which I wish I got to buy businesses and get that kind of backstop guarantee from the government. I mean, this is downright almost nationalizing the banks, but it's definitely centralizing the banks. And this is the main thing that I'm seeing right now, is that JP Morgan and others, the big boys and girls on Wall Street, are just basically picking over the carcass, the remnants of the small banks, and they're just waiting for the next one to fall so they can approach them on the other side of the boardroom and cut a deal to buy their business for pennies on the dollar. Is that what you're seeing too, Andy?
That's 100% it. And this is not even talking about the loans that these banks have and how many of these loans are going to go bad. And these small businesses, what happens when they lose their lifeline, when their bank goes under, these small businesses and the loans that they have. And I mean, this is a catastrophe waiting to happen. And yes, it's exactly right. They will scoop them up at pennies on the dollar. And what about these credit default swaps? Kind of what you alluded to right there, the insurance, if you will. A credit default swap, a 1-year credit default swap, is traditionally the main gauge for the health of a bond or a bond that's issued by a company. And so what happens is when a bond is used as collateral for a derivative or for a trade, they often will insure them or reinsure them with another company like AIG, who will pay or they have to pay to have the risk of that bond failing insured. And this is why AIG had to be bailed out in 2008, because the nature of Lehman and Bear going down would have brought Bear Stearns, or would have brought AIG down, and all these banks going down would have brought AIG down. Well, what happens now when it's been levered many times over? So when you talk about credit default swaps. Take a look at Deutsche Bank. The price of their credit default swaps has gone through the moon right now, or through the roof right now, because of the risk of insuring obligations that they've made, promises that they've made. So the cost of doing that is an indication of the health and safety of that institution. And it's getting worse. And yes, you will see a major consolidation of these banks like Credit Suisse, which will be bought for pennies on the dollar, like UBS did with Credit Suisse. And I think there'll be more and more and more of those. And this is our way to socialized banking and a central bank digital currency. Now, I'll take you down a rabbit hole just for a moment, just to think a little bit outside the box. I don't know what this all means, and I don't know how this all plays out, but Lael Brainerd was the second in charge at the Fed. I thought Lael Brainerd would be appointed the Fed chairman, replacing Powell when Powell's term was up, and he had to have been reappointed by Biden because he was a Trump appointee. And I was wrong, and they made Lael Brainerd number 2 at the Fed. She had come from the Treasury. She now is number 2 at the Fed, and she just left the Fed to head up the Economic Advisory Committee for the president in the White House. Lael Brainerd's whole thesis as she was applying or running for chairman of the Fed was a modern monetary theorist whose whole thesis was abolishment of the commercial banks and payments to and from the central bank, whether if they need to spur on growth and inflation, they give you money. And she even said, even though it's controversial, she thought if we had to slow things down, they take money from you or put a time signature on it where it has to be spent over a certain period of time as a central bank digital currency. But what's interesting is her thesis is the abolishment of the commercial banks. So if you wanted to do that and you wanted to issue a central bank digital currency, what better way to start the process rolling than to light a fuse under the 5,000 regional banks and push everyone into a handful of the biggest banks in the world, 4 or 5 of them, and then let those banks fail, or let 1 or 2 of them fail, and watch the carnage that ensues because of the systemic nature, where a bank like JP Morgan has over 51 trillion in derivatives. I mean, good luck. It's over. The whole system blows up until you have the Federal Reserve and their white horse called CBDC roll in and issue a new system. It's the Great Reset, possibly, as would be orchestrated by someone like Lael Brainerd. But all I can tell you is that what they are certainly attempting to do is consolidate the banking industry and freak everyone out enough to pull out of these regional banks. And the carnage that is going to bring on over the next couple of years, I think is going to be very frightening, because most people don't have a clue. Zach, most people don't sit and watch you and I and listen to you and I. We are speaking to the minority. It's growing, mind you. When you see states like Missouri and Wyoming and Tennessee and Mississippi and Texas and Alaska and Idaho, these states are talking about allowing, and several of them have already allowed gold to be part of the treasury, gold and silver, and now are wanting to allow them to be legal tender for all debts, public and private, because of what is happening in this world. And when you get a representative from Idaho stand up on the legislature floor, God bless him, just like Representative Mooney of West Virginia, and he says on the floor in Idaho, we need to let our people do what the central banks around the world are doing, and that is buy gold, because of the mismanagement of monetary policy and fiscal policy. And so there are people that are sounding the alarm in the mainstream for the very, very first time. But unfortunately, most people in middle America who have invested with the same bank and the same banker who they play poker with on Friday nights or golf with on Sunday mornings or go on walks with, these people who are part of their local communities, they have no idea what's coming. And when these banks get ripped out, forced to then do business with a handful of big banks, where these banks would lend money to people based upon relationships, now you're going to have to beg for scraps from some of the biggest banks in the world who have no interest in making any loans right now out into an economy that is as risky and fractured as this one is. This is a very, very scary thing, because the whole world works on credit. Let me just show you what I mean by that. Let me show you how much credit it takes to get a loaf of bread to the store. So you start with a farmer. The farmer uses credit to buy the combine and the diesel fuel and the seeds to plow his field. Then he plows his field of grain and he puts it on a truck the trucking company uses credit for the trucks and the diesel fuel and the maintenance and all of that. And that trucker has to bring the grain right to the to the wherever they refine it and turn it into flour, right, to the flour mill or to the grain mill, and they bring it there, and they're working on credit in order to run their operation, and then they refine it into flour and give it back to the trucker who's working on credit, who then brings it to the baker who's working on credit, who turns it into bread and then delivers it by truck again, who's working on credit, to get it to the grocery store who's working on credit to put that loaf of bread on the shelf. The amount of credit that is used to get a loaf of bread to the store from the farmer all the way, that whole cycle, everyone's working on credit. Most of these small businesses with the small regional banks. Now what? This is a very scary deal. And I think people don't quite understand that this system works on credit. And if you yank the availability of credit and put it in a small group of very powerful banks, this is not something that it speaks to what has made this country successful and what has made it very entrepreneurial. It has become anything but that. And if you're not close to the top and know these people or have perfect credit with tons of collateral, you're dead on arrival. This is something that speaks, I think, to very scary times ahead. And I wish to God that I wasn't saying that, but it is what I believe.
Yeah, and it's interesting how bold they now are talking about the CBDC, and even Christine Lagarde going as far as basically saying that this is the only way that they can maintain power and control and for the central banks. And then I had shared a tweet there with you too. We saw her today talking about how they're meeting at the BIS Innovation Hub in Frankfurt and Paris too, I believe. And basically you're seeing the Western kind of global elite alliance basically allow America to lose this reserve currency status, or at least it come into question, because what we're seeing is we're finally starting to see our allies, our once quote unquote partners like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, just announce that they're going to be paying Kenya in the Kenyan shilling for their oil. Now, if you think that that is the only deal that is happening right now that involves doing trade outside of the United States dollar, that would be very naive to think. There are hundreds of countries, as you go through the list. Every one of your interviews, you go through the list and you name off another dozen countries that have joined BRICS. And if they haven't joined formally, they've joined informally in other trade deals, right? Just because they're not part of the official BRICS alliance, maybe on paper yet, many deals are happening. And like I said, how it is now in the mainstream media. Andy, over the weekend, like you said, the masses are asleep. And now we see two clips that just came out from CNN and one from Fox News admitting the de-dollarization process is here and the rest of the world is dumping the US dollar for trade, for all the trade of all the commodities that you're talking about. Then the other thing too is the debt. We're going to talk here in a second about the debt and what China is doing to these developing countries and providing debt denominated in their currency, right? And then they're doing they're dumping our treasuries now at the fastest pace in a decade. So they're dumping the dollar for trade, they're dumping our treasuries, and they now have systems of trade outside of the US dollar, and they are actually going through the currency reset process faster than America. They went through the crisis faster. Problems are much worse in many of those countries, but now we're finally starting to see it hit home. But Andy, how many other deals do you think have been signed here? How many other countries are done with the dollar, whether they're official BRICS members or not? I mean, how quickly is this really accelerating this whole process?
Well, try to remember all the things you said. First of all, it's important to note that Mexico has formally applied to BRICS.
Right.
Our ally to the south has formally applied to BRICS. Now, there's a long way to go before they actually are accepted, but they have, as has Turkey, who has bought more gold than any country on the planet for the last year. And then again here in January, bought more gold than anyone in the world in January. And of course, now there's rumblings that Japan is talking about joining the BRICS, which would stick a knife right into the neck of the West, including Australia and New Zealand are contemplating joining BRICS. But when you talk about what happened in Kenya, their acknowledgement of dealing with Saudi and the United Arab Emirates to use Kenyan shillings instead of US dollars. I encourage everyone to Google that and watch the speech that the president gave. It'll blow you away, and within the first 30 seconds. And basically what he says in the first 30 seconds is, I'm telling all of you who own dollars to get rid of them because within the next few weeks, this whole system will be different. He just said that publicly. Well, what the hell does that mean? And when we talk about, the countries that are working together, Saudi Arabia and Turkey have worked in terms of bilateral relationships. Iran and Iraq, in a deal that was just brokered by China, are currently in the final stages on the first train rails between the two countries in history. And this can also stretch into Syria and Lebanon, which are part of the southern quarter of the Belt Road Initiative. This is all planned. How about the fact that what they're all missing is Iran and Saudi Arabia, Sunni and Shiite, they've hated each other forever, have just now, again, on another peace deal brokered by the adult in the room, China, have just set up diplomatic relations. They are mending broken fences. They are letting bygones be bygones. And they are building embassies in each other's countries. For the first time, they hated each other, but their enemy's enemy is their friend. And China sees this by promoting mutually beneficial agreements that will allow these countries to get out from underneath the thumb of the West, to break free of the hegemony of the West and the hypocrisy. You also have other Gulf states who have cut ties with Iran in the past, like the UAE and Kuwait, and they've already restarted relations with them. These are massive, massive, massive deals that aren't being talked about by the West. And yes, the West has acknowledged, I saw the Fox and I saw the CNBC or CNN deal where they're talking about the BRICS and these alliances that are being made. But what all of them are missing is what happens when the switch gets flipped, when all of these countries who are moving outside the dollar actually do move outside the dollar. What does that mean? And that is the Great Reset in and of itself, because every country on the planet, Zach, has had to own dollars since 1974. I mean, go back to World War II. At the end of World War II, the dollar was anointed the world reserve. Yeah, it was backed by gold. But until 1971, when they closed the gold window, every country in the world had dollars. And then 3 years later, when the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States was cemented with military protection, for the arrangement of oil being sold exclusively through OPEC in dollars, well, every country in the world has had to own dollars since 74 in order to buy oil. And so every country on the planet is flooded with dollars, way more than are here in the US. And when that switch is flipped, when all of the OPEC producing countries are on the Belt Road Initiative, every one of them, Saudi Arabia has applied not only to the BRICS, but also to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You have, which represents 60% of human population, and they came out, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has publicly said they want to issue a gold-backed settlement currency for the entire Eurasian landmass. What has the BRICS nations said? We want to issue a settlement currency or a reserve currency pegged to commodities. What is the Chinese petro-yuan bond? A bond that is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And the petro bond, that means countries like Iran have been sidestepping sanctions for years now by selling their oil to China for the petro-yuan bond, which they immediately convert into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. What is the common denominator here? It is the only other asset that has been lifted to tier one status, gold. US dollars and gold are tier one reserve assets. And this is why the central banks are voraciously accumulating it. It will be the glue that makes this all stick. The rallying cry is the suppression of the markets, the bullying, the sanctions, the mismanagement of the world reserve currency, all of the things that are making these countries form these alliances will be cemented with commodities pegged to a distributed ledger, to a blockchain. And I think that is how it works. This is how you roll out the new central bank digital currency of the BRICS nations, or a gold-backed settlement currency for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The digital yuan has been operational for over 4 years now. and it's done close to 30 billion in transactions. So I guess all I'm simply trying to say to you is that you can see the handwriting on the wall. And I've been using lately this example of the game Jenga. I don't know if you've ever played Jenga, where there's all those little blocks and you pull one out at a time.
Yeah.
Well, Kenya dumping the dollar to use its shilling in favor, for oil purchases in and of itself is meaningless, but it is another little piece out of the Jenga pile. And one of these days, it all falls over. And that's when Saudi Arabia and OPEC standing arm in arm on a stage with all the BRICS countries in the Belt Road. There's 150 countries on the Belt Road, all of them saying, hey, thanks for the memories, but we're now going to open up oil until the BRICS currency is up and running, or until the settlement currency is up and running. We are going to only take now we're going to take the petro yuan bond, or we're only going to take rupee or ruble or gold or whatever it is. Bang, like that. Every country on the planet dumps dollars. There is your Great Reset. There is your Operation Sandman. There is that moment where the dollar gets forsaken globally, hits our shores in a tsunami of inflation, and interest rates spike to the moon in response to a dollar that is hyperinflating. And that's when everything collapses. And if you think the bank balance sheets look bad at 5%, what do they look like at 15 or 20? It's Armageddon. And I think you can see this accelerating. And when you see our allies like Mexico, like Saudi Arabia, like Turkey, like Egypt, all of these countries saying, hey, thanks, but and rumblings that Japan, who's been shedding their 1 trillion in treasuries at the fastest pace ever, and Australia and New Zealand talking about it. Well, why would they do that? Because they see that the West is stupidly antagonizing the world by saying we're going green, all right? And 90% of the world is not. And that's who all of these countries are uniting with. Those countries who are not going green, those countries who are going to forge an alliance against the West. And by us going green, we are turning our back on the Saudi way of life, like it or not, and we will lose the petrol reserve status. And maybe this is intended every bit as much as blowing up the regional banks is intended, every bit as much as weaponizing the dollar was intended to make every other country on the planet say, shit, are we next? What did the European Union just say to Russia? Well, we're not just sanctioning your funds, we're actually confiscating them. We're not giving them back. We're going to use it to rebuild the Ukraine. How do you think that makes the rest of the world look at us, the bullies, where a country like us can go into Iraq, who just said they're going to do international settlement with China in yuan, not in dollars? A lot of thanks they have for us, but why would they thank us? We came in and blew up their entire country under the guise of weapons of mass destruction. Oops, sorry, they weren't there, and there's no repercussions for us. But when you look at, now, and I want to just phrase something one way so people can look at things differently, right? Why is the world sympathetic with Russia? Much of the world is, because imagine this for a moment, right? So you have Mexico, who has just formally applied to the BRICS, long ways away from them being there. But let's say 5 years from now, they're deeply entrenched with the BRICS, who is also going to have a military presence. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, part of their charter is military. So what if 10 years from now, 8 years from now, we have BRICS nations comprised of China and Russia and other military stationed in Mexico right outside the Texas border? I mean, how would that make us feel? Why do you think Putin feels the way he does as NATO is encroaching into the Ukraine and Finland, places that they agreed would never do? How do you think that makes them feel? How would it make you feel if you lived in the United States, if you have missiles and military bases pointed at the United States from just a few miles away? This is what's going on, and the rest of the world looks at it that way, and we don't, because our media brainwashes us to only see things in one particular fashion. And this is the kind of hypocrisy that the world is rallying against. Now, I'm not condoning anything military. I'm not condoning a war. I just want to open people's eyes. This is why 85% of the world is still trading with Russia. This is why this is a much bigger deal here in the West than it is in the rest of the world, because they see the hypocrisy of it. It's no different than having missiles in Cuba. Well, that almost started World War III. Why is it any different when we do it to another country? But if they decide to do it to us, it's different. This is the problem, where it is a hypocritical way of doing things. And the rest of the world has never been able to challenge until now. And this union, it's like everyone in the sixth grade standing up to the one big bully or the two big bullies. And finally, when they've all had enough, they meet them out on the schoolyard and say, we're done with you. And that's what's happening. And I hope I'm wrong, but you look around and see, and it's just becoming more and more evident that these things are accelerating in pace. And I think this is just the very beginning.
And I see that in my comments. Now I'm going to share this story and share this example because it for me is my gauge. So for those of you who know, I have a big platform on TikTok. I read a lot of the comments and I get a very good gauge of where the masses are at when a video goes viral. So I posted a video yesterday talking about this de-dollarization process, and it was just a quick little video. It got over, 100,000 views in the last 24 hours, and I'm reading through, there's hundreds of comments of people telling me that the dollar's still fine. Everything's fine here in the United States. I posted another video last week where I said, Andy, I just said, we can't afford Ukraine. Whether you support the war or not, our country is broke, bust, $30 trillion in debt, over $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Whether we want to support Ukraine or not, we're actually broke as a country. And I get hundreds of comments below that video of basically just programmed bots that want to support this cause. They have no idea what's happening before us right here.
And this is to all of those people out there, okay? Janet Yellen had to, as she called it, go to great measures to raise the debt ceiling a month ago. Do you know what those great measures were?
No.
Those great measures were, and before I tell you what the great measures were, I had to search like hell for it. And I finally found it on a Yahoo Finance article. And the very next article says, before I tell you what was in this article, says, oh, and by the way, we've just given another $40 billion to the Ukraine, including pensions to their government. Now, mind you, we have a $1.75 trillion shortfall in pensions here, in the pension funding here in the United States. And we have given the Ukraine over $115 billion. Now, what did the article say? The article said the great, she called it extraordinary measures to raise the debt ceiling. She had to borrow. Well, by the way, the 2022 balance sheet for the government just came out, and it said very succinctly that there is a $76 trillion underfunded Social Security. $76 trillion, that plus Medicare, Medicaid, government, military pensions, it's over $100 trillion just there alone in unfunded liabilities. So we are broke and insolvent. But in order to, just like in Social Security, 76 trillion, and a trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. But this is to those people. Do you know what she did to raise the debt ceiling? She borrowed money from the Civil Servants Retirement Fund, the Postal Service Retirement Fund, and the Disabled Veterans Retirement Fund to borrow money to give to the Ukraine. I mean, how stupid you got to be? How stupid you have to be where $5 billion to build a wall to keep our children from dying of fentanyl poisoning is the number one cause of death for teenagers right now. Fentanyl poisoning pouring in on the southern border and 5 million plus people entering illegally, but 115 billion to the Ukraine, which is antagonizing and precipitating World War III and global de-dollarization. But that's okay. These people have their head up their ass so far, it's not even funny. And I'm sorry for speaking that way, but it bothers me to the nth degree. These people have no idea from what they speak. They have no idea about anything other than what the stupid media is telling them. Think about this for a minute. We are destroying this country. We are bankrupting this country. And these people's children will be slaves. Either that or they will be a great reset and we will hit the greatest of all depression. But think about that for a minute. We had to borrow over $700 billion just to pay interest on the loan. And that was money that we borrowed to begin with. We're borrowing money to pay interest on money we borrowed. And then we think it's okay to give $115 billion to the Ukraine, but not $5 billion to build up a wall to keep illegals with fentanyl coming in or to build up our failing infrastructure. It is so upside down, it's not even funny. We should give the Ukrainian government pensions. That's our job to do when there is almost a $2 trillion pension shortfall in this country. Our leaders are so upside down stupid, it's not even funny. And for the people who are pushing back on you, you know what? They need to take a lesson in reality right now, because they have been brainwashed by media that has them looking at everything from the complete and total wrong perspective. It bothers me so bad I can't even say.
Folks, we got Andy dialed in here today. I love it, brother, and I'm 100% right there with you. And I call this the greatest transfer of wealth in world history, and many people are going to be on the wrong side of this transfer. And I just continue to ask the question. I kind of push back and I say, how's your program working out? Being politically correct, being woke, going broke, still complaining. And then I have sympathy, though, for the common man or woman on Main Street, though, that's actually getting caught up in this. So part of me, some of these people, I'm like, how stupid can you be? This is causing countries around the world to dump our treasuries at the fastest pace in 10 years. They're doing trade outside of our currency. And you're just trying to figure out what you're going to do when the next barbecue you're going to have in the backyard is going to be. I'm worried about Americans that are asleep at the wheel. Some of them are stupid and really we can't save them. But for the people that are actually trying to figure out what we can do to be on the right side of this transfer of wealth, I've been talking about, making sure that we still have cash flow during a time with record inflation that we haven't seen in 40 years. We got to bring in the paper, the dollar that's dying and fading away. We got to bring in more and more of it to be able to feed our families. And that's just the facts, right? So I'm talking about building recession-proof businesses, okay? And then with our profits, with our extra money, hopefully we have a little bit left over, we start to look at what do we do for investing, or for those listening who have 401k pensions that are on the verge of going bust, 401ks that are having a rough go at it. The 60-40 portfolio had its third worst year ever last year. Bonds had their worst year ever in history last year. What do we do, right? For me, it's been commodities, a couple cryptocurrencies with utility. And as a first-time home buyer, I'm looking to buy my first property. I have cash on the sidelines, and I'm patiently waiting to buy my first real estate deal. And for those who understand real estate, I think there's going to be some good opportunities, but more pain's on the way for the real estate market. The reason why I like real estate is because it's a packaged up commodity. All the lumber, all the copper that goes into building that house, and then the labor, you're buying that at a fixed cost, and hopefully you can make the property cash flow. There's a good play to be had there, but you got to know what you're doing. We're not in, I call it the participation trophy market for the real estate investors that we had over the past, decade, where we really just, and over the last couple years in particular, Andy, the amount of liquidity that they injected into this system allowed everybody to get a participation trophy and call themselves a winner, whether it was starting up their business, whether it was calling themselves a real estate investor. Now we're figuring out where the real value is. We look at this commodities versus equities ratio and what the rest of the world is doing to counter the reserve currency status and to build a new economy and a new financial system. Like you said, it's all commodities, real resources that actually run the planet. And so you're seeing the money pour out of the high-flying, overpriced equities. Crypto's been killed. We've seen $2 trillion of that market cap wiped out. And we're seeing the commodities start to break out. Gold breaking above 2,000 here recently. Silver still getting ready here and absolutely primed now. By a lot of metrics, people say that silver should be at $60, $65 right now, just off the historical ratio, gold to silver, right? So we're starting to see this. This is the opportunity. This is what the average American who doesn't want to be asleep at the wheel actually wants to take advantage of this opportunity. How big is this move into commodities on the way or already began here? How are you seeing this thing as someone who's actually facilitating and selling the precious metals, Andy? You have a unique perspective. What are we seeing right now? You just said you've been doing a lot of business here recently.
Yeah, I mean, a massive amount of business, more so than we've ever done ever in my career. But it's happening globally. Everything is disappearing, and it's not just the gold and silver market. You look at the London Metals Exchange last year; they came out and said 95% of their zinc was delivered off the exchange. Over 75% of their aluminum was delivered off their exchange. There's a man named Zoltan Pozar who used to be the repo market guru for the New York Fed, and now he works for UBS, and he understands the plumbing of the financial world better than anyone. And he calls this Bretton Woods 3, which is a system dominated by commodities. Bretton Woods 1 would have been basically it was at the end of World War II, where the Allies met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Bretton Woods 2, technically and informally, would have been in 1971, after we cut off the gold window, and in 74 then we became the petrodollar. There's Bretton Woods 2. This is Bretton Woods 3, a system that will be dominated by commodities and transparency and things that you need to build an infrastructure, the real tangibles, not debt instruments and an opaque system, but a transparent system, maybe using blockchain, and real commodities backing the system. And it is true, the exchanges are being bled dry using suppression of price on the Western markets that give you tremendous leverage. If I want to control a 100-ounce gold contract, $200,000 worth of gold, I just need to have $7,500 in my margin account. Well, if I'm a central bank with $1 billion in my margin account, I can create whatever perception of reality I want. I drive down the paper price and scoop up all the physical when no one's looking, because they're only concerned about price. And then I use more freshly created money to paper over my short. And that's what they've been doing for a very long time, little by little by little by little, not doing it all at once. It causes too much attention. It's the frog in the pot of boiling water jumps out, but if you slowly turn up the heat, it falls asleep and dies. That's the theory, right? So that's what they've been doing, slowly and with methodically suppressing the price, keeping it volatile enough to keep everyone out, and draining the LBMA and draining the COMEX of their available stockpiles of silver and gold and aluminum and zinc and corn and soybeans and wheat and you name it, and oil production and gold mines. And they are repositioning. What are they doing when they go into these countries in Africa or into South America or into the Middle East? They're not giving them money. What they're doing is they're going in there and they're building infrastructure. They're building ports. They're building railways. They're building bridges. They're uniting countries that have hated each other under common and mutual benefit. They are building gold and silver mines, oil refineries. They are building ways for countries to become industrialized, to become wealthy and a vibrant middle class, and to do things mutually beneficial, not only to China and the BRICS, but to these under-industrialized countries that are rich in commodities, but don't have the wherewithal or the infrastructure to do anything about it. They're doing it the right way. And they are uniting the rest of the majority of the world in this pursuit against the West. And it's the Western suppression and the Western plundering, literally coming in and literally taking all of these resources for their own good, instead of allowing these countries to advance themselves, instead of having everything taken from them and given to a very few. This will build up the entire infrastructure and allow a middle class to emerge, and allow these other under-industrialized countries to have what we've had all these years. And we are squandering to the nth degree this privilege of being the world reserve currency. And it's really very frightening and very sad. And you can see it. You can see it if you look closely enough, Zach. I know you see it. I hope everyone else out there opens their eyes to it, because this is just beginning, but it's accelerating. I have been talking about this. Go back and watch my videos from 2020. It's been the topic of every video I have done, nearly every video, thousands of them over the last 3 years, every single one of them speaking to the global de-dollarization, the loss of the petro status, and the squandering of the world reserve currency. And I think there's a long way to go before people wake up, and that's the sad part. And if you are not a contrarian, you will be a victim. I really do believe when this is all said and done, he or she who loses least wins. That's how bad it will get.
Right. Andy, I wanted to make one point too. You've been mentioned here a couple of times how DLT technology, blockchain technology, can be used to tokenize these assets, commodities, and how important that's going to be. I think what we're looking at right now too is it removes the trust. So, these countries don't trust each other. They have one thing in common. They want to get away from the US dollar. They want an alternative, right? And like you said, they want to get developed, develop ports and all this development that's taking place in these countries. Very important. I wonder if they're going through all the environmental permits before they throw in all those ports and do all that construction, Andy. Be interested to see what process they go through, because I know where I live, they make you do $50,000 in wetland mitigation to build a house on a 5-acre lot. But anyways, I digress. What we're starting to see, though, is this transition's underway. It's accelerating, but they have one thing in common against the dollar. DLT technology allows them to actually tokenize this and put it on an immutable ledger that both sides can confirm, trust, and verify, because these countries don't trust each other, right?
That's the argument against it ever working. That's the argument that people would say, look at the euro. That's why it didn't work. They have different ideologies, different history, different work ethic, different everything, and they don't trust each other. They don't trust Brussels. They don't trust the Bundesbank, whatever. This is the answer to that. And if you do it the right way, using distributed ledger technology, showing the veracity and the immutability of what's pledged, having it audited and verified by independent auditors from each country or whatever it may be, you do it the right way, it's a home run. And that I do believe. I really do. I think it is a home run, and it is happening right before our very eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was fun getting to catch up with you in Vancouver, and I was telling you about this Ripple versus SEC lawsuit, kind of filling you in on it, and we're about to be getting the summary judgment ruling at any point here. But I just want to say, to the corruption that you alluded to earlier, I mean, you described Janet, I call her Janet No Tellin Yellen, her actions as treasonous, and what we've exposed in this lawsuit is 100% corruption at the highest levels of the SEC. And now we see the CFTC just filed a lawsuit against Binance. As I said at the beginning, 99% of cryptos go away, and there is a lot that needs to be cleaned up. And so we're starting to see that process, but what we're seeing in this lawsuit in particular is the corruption of the SEC exposed. I think Ripple is one of the legitimate companies that's trying to use this technology to tokenize an internet of value, is what they call it. And it's all about the commodities, the derivatives, the debt, all getting tokenized on a ledger that people, can scale and be efficient enough to work with, settling trillions of dollars on a daily basis on these cross-border payment values. And then you also alluded to the amount of derivatives trading on a daily basis as well. There's quadrillions of dollars of value moving around, settling, being stored, and that needs to move somewhere, right? And what we see is the common thing of the United States losing the reserve currency status. I hope that people are awake to this fact now that even the mainstream media is admitting it. And if the mainstream media is admitting it, that it's already underway. It's already, like you said, about to accelerate into hyperdrive. And so, folks, down below in the link down below in the description, I'm going to put Andy's website, and you guys can head on over to Miles Franklin, and you guys can get some precious metals, and he'll take care of you. And let him know that Zach sent you, right? And Andy, can you just speak on the dynamics that you're seeing? It's flying off the shelf, or in this case, it's flying out of the vaults. Everyone, we're going to link it on down below. But Andy, it's moving quick these days, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and I showed you real quick. I showed you before we started this, our new website. It's done. And we have two pieces that are left, an integration. The tax software, there's still a handful of stupid states in this country that have not removed sales tax. It has to be integrated in, and every county has different rules. So we're integrating that right now, and the credit card processing. We're very close to launching it. Until then, they'll want to send us an email at info@milesfranklin, info@milesfranklin.com. Put Zach sent me. We'll make sure your listeners get the best price in America. We'll send you a price list. If you find it offered by a major company for less, we'll match it or beat it. You won't. Typically, we're the best in the country. We'll answer any questions. We can help you with IRAs. Whatever you want, let us know. And that would be the best way to reach us. And I'm sorry, what was your other question?
Well, it's just the vaults. I wanted to, did you have any updated numbers? Like you said, these vaults are getting drained of these others. And so you already kind of alluded to, but specifically with silver and gold, I've been watching the COMEX vaults get drained, then they get filled back up, and they're just getting cleaned out as quick as they can get filled up.
Yeah, I think we've seen the 11th straight month in a row of gold deliveries. And I think we've seen in terms of silver, I don't have the specific numbers, but huge amounts continuing in deliveries out of COMEX. It's not stopping. Let me see. I probably have it right here. Hold on. Can probably give you the numbers. I think I do. Just double check real quick. I might not, but I usually write this stuff down. Central banks added 77 tons of gold in January. That's 192% month over month increase. The Central Bank of Turkey bought 23 tons. Here we go. I think this might be it. Nope, that's not it. I don't have the exact numbers, but I do know that it's been 11 straight months of deliveries off of COMEX for gold, month over month. It continues to disappear, and the same thing with silver. I mean, we're down to 39 million ounces in the registered category, which is, almost the Bank of India imported 9 times that amount last year, over 304 million ounces. And so when you see the drawdown that we are seeing to these levels, it's nonstop. And, one of the things that has made it a little bit hard to give you these exact numbers is there was a hack on the Commitment of Traders report on the COMEX where, they get their numbers from a company in Ireland for whatever reason, and that company was hacked, and so the numbers have been months behind, and they're just getting up to speed. But bottom line is, we're seeing a nonstop progression of deliveries off of the exchanges. So it hasn't stopped, and it's increasing. And I'm looking to see if I can find the numbers, but I don't have them here. I apologize. Next time we chat, I will have the exact numbers for you. But nonetheless, it's continuing to disappear off of the exchanges at a very, very fast pace.
Right. And that's why I said, if folks are ready to make the allocation, if they're ready to make the move, I'm not here to give them financial advice, but I just would encourage to start the process, right? Because whether you're rolling over a 401k retirement of savings, or you're just looking to, spend some cash, trade some fiat for a real hard currency, we want to start that process because we had a 200 million ounce deficit last year. Like you said, some of these countries are just eating up the supply, and we have no idea. China and Russia are starting to report now what they've kind of been doing and what they've been up to, but we know how they operate, and it's hard to get good data out of those countries as well. And so we got to start the process, folks, because they are running short, and I think that a supply shock is coming in. We actually have already seen it in some of the other lithium was one last year that did a major run up. Like you said, it's already here, folks, and it's the move from the equities back into the real economy, the real value, which is commodities. And then, like you said, DLT is going to play a part. It's a home run, is what you called it there, and I agree 100%. But 99% goes away. We still got a little ways to go here in this debt, currency, and liquidity crisis. But it's an incredible opportunity for those of us that are prepared. Andy, it was just a great way letting you go off here today and break down this situation. Folks, you can see that it's accelerating now. We were called crazy for talking about this years ago, right? And we were dismissed, doom and gloom. And now it's really a matter of survival. And I just hope, like I said, that we can get our audience on the right side of this transfer of wealth. Any other closing statements from yourself, Andy?
Zach, I would say trust your gut. We are in a period of time that is very much uncharted. And, thank God that you're out there doing what you're doing, telling the public what's going on. And look, I mean, one number that just popped up, 10,000 tons of silver were taken off of the LBMA last year. They recently came out and said, if we see deliveries like this in 2023, there'll be nothing left. The biggest money in the world is front running what is coming. They are draining the exchanges, and it is very difficult to do. It's a very sophisticated play. When you do that, it is not, have a much easier time writing me a check for $20 million to take possession of metal when, and I would deliver it to you, instead of having to take it off of COMEX, which is not easy. You have to be very sophisticated. And when this metal leaves COMEX and the LBMA, it's never coming back because it loses its industrial liquidity for, like maybe Elon Musk says, I'll pay $20 premium for every ounce that people have in 1,000-ounce bars in COMEX. Well, if they're getting delivered off the COMEX, to get them back in, they would have to be reintroduced and assayed. That's not happening. They're leaving. They're going eastward. Trust your gut. Do not look at price. The biggest money in the world is using price as a tool of misdirection. And I just think there'll be a lot for us to talk about in the coming weeks, Zach. And, I like the way that you look at things. And I like the fact that you're a younger guy who understands this. And I'd like to be able to come back again and talk about what's happening, because I have a feeling this is going to accelerate, and it's beginning to accelerate. I think in the coming weeks, we will see some real events, whether it be with our banking system or the further growing alliances with the BRICS and de-dollarization. Whatever it may be, there's going to be a lot to talk about. But I think the bottom line is for people is do what the biggest money in the world is doing. And that is mitigate your exposure to the US dollar. That is the most important thing. And if it means by buying XRP or buying that farmland that you want, or that home that you want, even though I believe real estate has rough times ahead as rates rise, or buying precious metals. I think you need to do that. And we're getting close to the 12th hour, because the amount of availability, it starts at the top. And when you see the exchanges being bled dry methodically by the most sophisticated money in the world, who's closest to the information, when you see the central banks buy the second most gold in history, the most since 1967, when you see countries that we've been allies with for forever, like Mexico and Saudi Arabia, move to the other side, it's time to wake up. That would be my parting thought.
And the precious metals allow me to sleep well at night, but then also go out and be willing to take risk on my businesses, right? On cryptocurrency, which is a very risky asset. But like you said, having that barbell portfolio approach, I can sleep well at night and go out and try to take massive risk, because not massive risk, calculated risk, right? Because there is a tremendous amount of opportunity for those of us that are tapped in, and you've been a big part of helping wake up so many people. So just so much respect to you, Andy, and you're always welcome here. It's been an absolute pleasure once again. And like I said, folks, the link will be on down below. Get the precious metals coming, because it's just going to be a matter of who doesn't get their silver, who doesn't get their gold as it's flying out of the vaults at a record pace. So once again, thank you, Andy. It is always a pleasure.
It is too, Zach. And again, for your listeners, info@Miles Franklin, put Zach sent me. I will make sure personally that your listeners are getting the best price, and whatever questions they need answered, done the right way. And I look forward to picking up where we left off. I'm sure there'll be a lot to talk about then.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andy. And God bless all of you guys on the way out. Let's smash that thumbs up, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take care out there.